Another Friends from the Field webinar. These webinars, if you haven't joined us before, are co-hosted by Blue Hill Heritage Trust, which is a community-based conservation organization for the Blue Hill Peninsula, as well as Island Heritage Trust, which is a land trust for Deer Isle, Stonington, and the surrounding islands. We're super excited to have Bert with us today, and I'm going to do a brief introduction in a second after Jake gives us a little technology help.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. So there's a couple of features that I want to point out at the bottom of your screen. There's the chat feature, which Bert's going to present for about 45 to 50 minutes, and we'll save our questions for like the last 10 to 15. There also will be a raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen, which Lander will monitor at the end of the presentation. And that will give you the opportunity to either tune in with everyone with your video or just your audio. There's the option for both to ask Bert a question directly. If not, if that doesn't sound like your piece of pie, then you can just drop your questions in the chat box, and Lander and I will do our best to kind of sift through them in order and ask them to Bert on your behalf. And with that, I think I will hand it back over to Lander and let her formally introduce our presenter.
Thank you, Jake. So welcome, Bert. Bert is an engineer and author, and he is a Deer Isle resident as well, a former researcher for the U.S. Army Cold Regions Laboratory who specialized in subsurface instrumentation research. Thank you so much, Bert, for being here, and you can take it away.
Hello everybody. Thank you for joining out there in the darkness. Today's talk, old maps, GPS and GIS, a way to re-visualize where you live and your surroundings, and I guarantee at the end of this presentation, you won't look at your local world the same way again. So the talk today, non-technical, people who are interested in history and land, and we're going to overview some topics. We're going to demonstrate some of the resources and give you a couple of references where you too can join in the fun. The flow of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about my background and interest. Then we'll delve into old maps. We'll delve into a new technology called LIDAR Imagery. Talk about your old friend Google Earth, global positioning systems, something called geographical information systems. If we have time, I'll touch on a couple of recent projects and then a couple of resources for your application. Again, hold your questions, and I think Lander has the mute button, so we're good to go here. So who am I? I'm an electrical engineer. I've been to both the North Pole area and the South Pole area doing ground penetrating radar for geophysical purposes and for other military purposes, including IED and counter mine detection research. So I like looking at stuff in the dirt or the ground as opposed to most people who like to look at the stars. Again, I'm interested in looking at stuff in the ground, and here at Deer Isle and elsewhere, I'm interested in finding unknown and lost grave sites, documenting historical sites, preserving history, seeing the unseen, and consulting for other military and civil applications. Ground penetration radar is one of my tools. I can find graveyards or graves within graveyards, and been doing some work over at Fort Powell in Stockton Springs in that regard. My other passion is metal detecting, historical metal detecting, and I get some permission from people here on the island, and these are just a couple of the historical treasures that I've discovered, stuff going back to the late 1600s all the way up to the, let's say, the 1950s or 1960s. And my intent is that eventually all of these should be archived with the local historical society with their appropriate documentation. Okay, let's talk old maps. They're available online and they're free. And they're formats that you can easily put onto your computer. Lots of sources, universities, libraries, Library of Congress, Smithsonian, other places like that. And we can discuss that later. Let's start with a part of the world that I suspect many of you are familiar with. This is the hustling, bustling downtown Deer Isle at the center of the map. You see Route 15 going north to south orientation and 15A kind of coming off to the west. The relatively current image, there's tons and tons of visual data here, but grab onto your hats, we're jumping back about 250 years. This is a section of a map of the same area that was made by a fellow named de Barry in 1776. He was a cartographer for the Crown and made many, many maps of serious ports, Boston, Philadelphia, etc. On this map, again, hand-drawn, it doesn't quite match up graphically with Google Earth. He didn't have access at the time. And what you see on this map is shoreline, and the little black rectangles are homesteads in 1776. The dotted lines are stone walls and or property boundaries. Let's jump ahead about 100 years. This is the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey map from 1881 of the exact same area. This is probably the most exquisite map, detail-wise, of this area. Every stone wall, every homestead, every goat path show up on this map. And this is one of the primary maps I use when I'm doing historical hiking and metal detecting and other things around the island. It's a fantastic map. Jumping ahead in time, we go to 1904. Map has a lot less detail. It's a lot more geographically accurate, but still it shows homesteads, buildings, and other geographical features. Jumping ahead, 1944. Again, detail is lacking on the map from earlier iterations, but we see homesteads. The double dashed line are unimproved roads. The red dashed line are major lines of communication, major highways, Route 15, 15A. Jumping ahead, 1983. We have all the buildings shown. The open boxes are usually barns or outbuildings. The dark solid blocks are usually dwellings or businesses or schools or churches, that sort of thing. The green area is area that would be forested, and the white areas would be more urbanized, could be grassy fields, lawns, that sort of thing. Jumping ahead to 2011, even less detail. We no longer have the houses shown on the map, just the roadways and the topo lines indicating elevation. So we have this series of wonderful maps of the area, and they're sort of a time machine as we flip back and forth through them. Let's talk about another technique that I've just started exploring. It's called LIDAR, Light Imaging Detection and Ranging. It's basically it's radar with a laser beam. From an aircraft, they'll send out a laser beam pulse. It'll bounce off the ground, and they time how long it takes to return with incredibly accurate equipment, and they can tell elevation. So they scan this pencil point laser beam across the ground, and they develop a terrain map from that. And once they process this amazing data set, I mean, it's oodles of data. Once they process this data, they wind up with one of the products is a digital elevation map that shows incredible detail, looks through the canopy. So like a Google Earth image like this, you see a couple of roads and a couple of houses and nothing but trees, okay? Now I'm gonna show this same arbitrary section of Deer Isle with on the 1881 map, so you get some idea of what the world looked like underneath the tree. Uh-oh, what happened?
Hey, Bert.
Hello?
Hi.
What happened?
I think you disappeared for a second.
Okay. Okay, am I back?
You're back.
Okay, so we're back here. We're back to 1881. And again, the double dash lines are unimproved roads. The single dash lines are stone walls. And the black rectangles are buildings. And then the squiggly lines are elevation lines. The clear areas, the white areas, are areas of that have been improved for agriculture. The stippled area with all the little asterisk-like features are woodland in 1881. So just kind of keep this map in mind, and we're going to flip ahead to the LIDAR image. Now,
Bert, I'll interrupt.
yes.
I think you need to share your screen again.
Oh, stand by. I don't know what happened. It's our, okay, slideshow. I apologize for this, but it's not my fault. Let's see.
Technology is imperfect.
Start from current slide. Okay. So 1881, did people get to see this? Yes?
Let's give it just a second
Hello?
to load, Bert.
Okay. Anything happening?
Well, we see your slide selection toolbar, but it seems like the current slide that you're, oh, now we see a black and white slide, a map of Deer Isle from 1881.
Okay. USGS 1881. Okay. And I don't know if what I said got through, but the dashed lines are stone walls, and the little squares are buildings. I'm going to flip a slide here. This is the LIDAR image, and you can see, if you squint a little bit, you can see the stone walls as kind of little dashed shadowy lines in the feature. You can see the roads, of course, but this imagery is stripped off the canopy, and I can see every stone wall on the island if I do a little bit of analysis to this image. But I hope the audience can, with a little imagination, see some of the stone walls. Most of them are running diagonally from the southwest corner of the image to the northeast corner of the image. So you can see those as shadowy linear features. You can carry these maps with you on your smartphone. Once I show you where you download these maps as JPEGs, you can plug them on into the micro SD card in your smartphone. Again, I work with an Android phone. I can't help you if you got an iPhone, but I pull that card out of the phone, download the maps like I would download onto it photographs I've taken with the camera, and I walk around with my my cell phone, and I can annoy you by saying, "Hey, where do you live? Show me on this 1881 map." I just find it as a useful reference rather than carrying paper. Google Earth. Everybody knows about Google Earth, sort of. But I don't know how many people know about these two features on Google Earth. If you look to the lower left corner, there's a little thing. It says 1991 and a little icon. If you click on that icon, you get this bar up at the top of the screen. And it's a timeline where if you move the cursor along that line, you can see maps of digital images of that exact place anywhere where you see a vertical tick mark on that timeline. So in this case, you can see Deer Isle anywhere from, or imagery anywhere from 1991 up to 2014. Actually, 2018 is the latest image. So it's a cool feature you can play with. And here's an example of 3 images of the same scene taken moving that timeline slider on Google Earth. And what you're looking at here is centered in the screen is approximately Mariners Park on Long Cove. And you can see some of the development, some of the changes in scenery. The cool thing to do is to look at a winter scene because a lot of the canopy is gone. And also a late winter scene, you'll see linear features where the snow has not quite melted up against stone walls. It's kind of another thing if you're looking for features or land characteristics. Here's a picture of my neighborhood in 1991 and relatively current 2014. You can see that back in 91, it was just, this is along Long Cove and Route 15 in Deer Isle. There was nothing but forest. And by 2014, there's a half a dozen houses in a development along there. And one of those houses is where I live. So again, using that timeline feature in Google Earth is kind of cool to see how the world has changed. Global positioning systems, our next topic. GPS, many of you probably have one in your car with the annoying voices in 500 feet turn left. Not getting too much into the technical data, there's a cluster of satellites sending information to that little handheld or dashboard thing, and a little computer in there at the same time and triangulating your position. The current technology will tell you within 10 feet, 3 meters, of where you are on the surface of the Earth. There are higher level resolutions, but the common people resolution is within 10 feet. Your typical handheld GPS, you have a map like the one in the left-hand side. And what I've done is I've installed on my handheld the 1881 map. So it's a handheld time machine. I walk around Deer Isle looking at the world in 1881, and I can walk up, and I have walked up to stone walls and other features just by having the map there. This is just a test I did, a driving test. The light blue line represents a brief auto trip I took with that GPS around Deer Isle. Went across the hall over downtown Deer Isle and back across the Center District Crossroad. And I just show this to show how close, how accurate the drive on the road versus the graphics of the map of 1881 map are. So I can find features within, let's say the width of one of the roads up here. I walk up to something with that accuracy, maybe 10 or 20 feet, as I was talking before. Now, everybody can do this on their handheld GPS. You go to this website, which I stumbled across. They have free and they have for pay capabilities where you put your image of your map, the thing that you've downloaded, one of the sources I can show you as a JPEG, and you do an A to B comparison. You move two cursors, put them on the same crossroads, let's say, and go click, and you do that about 100 times, and it aligns the map, geo-references the map, as people use the expression. So a half hour of your time, you have a map that you can put on your GPS and walk around in the past. Next topic, geographic information systems. These are computer programs that allow you to overlay many, many layers of data, graphical data, spatial data, in other words, maps and map pinpoints and things like that. There are free open source versions of this software. I use one and love it. And there's tons of good YouTube videos on how to become a master of this QGIS program and other GIS programs as well. How this GIS looks on the computer screen. Again, I've taken an arbitrary section of Deer Isle. The body of water on the right side of the screen is the lily pond, just to give you a point of reference. And so this is the Google Earth image, which I've installed into this database. And then I've overlaid the 1881 map, and I have it here in transparency. And you can see how things line up, not quite exact, but that's the difference between a real image and a map image. I can show strictly the 1881 map. And then what I've done in this image, the yellow areas are properties on the island where I've had permission to do some metal detecting. So that's yet another layer on the map. And by the way, all the other maps I showed you earlier on, the 1776, 1881, 1904, 1944, and so on, I have all overlaid so I can flip-flop between them and make these similar comparisons. Again, on this image, the yellow areas indicate places where I've been allowed to do some metal detecting. Now, in this next layer, you see all these little measly spots, these little dots. Each one of those dots represents an artifact that I found while metal detecting. So it's yet another layer, and each one of those marks is GPSed in. And I can delve down further, but if I touch with my mouse one of those red marks, I get a hyper screen that jumps up and indicates a picture of an artifact I found at that point. So in this case, in the yard that's highlighted, I found a Civil War belt buckle. And the cool thing is we've been able to attribute that to a former resident of the island and a veteran of the Civil War. So that's kind of a cool touchstone of history that we've been able to find. But again, every one of the other objects shown on this map would similarly, if you touch on its little red dot, a hyper screen like this would jump up with the appropriate data. Okay, how are we doing time-wise? We doing okay?
We've got about 4:25, Bert. So
all
you're
right.
good.
So okay. So some recent projects, things that I've done based on the old maps and some of the other technologies I use. The long forgotten graveyard and burial of Sam Webb and John Harvey, a veteran of the Civil War, of the Revolutionary War. A gentleman named Randy Harvey did 35 years of research to find where his relative was buried. And in the last 2 years, he discovered the burial site. And this is one of the cases where the maps don't tell all. The red arrow on the map, on the 1881 on the map on the right, shows the approximate location of the graveyard. And on this map, there's no indication of a graveyard in that area. This map has dozens of other, even family graveyards shown, but this one was not shown. And Randy was able to, through historical records, find that site, and that was kind of exciting. So once he found the site, he actually found 2 stones. At the time, both of these stones were laying on the ground, covered with all sorts of organic overburden. And he did an incredible job of clearing the area. They believe from the Historical Society that there are at least 14 individuals buried here, only 2 formal stones. The stones that you see in this image are the remaining stones from that site. And that's a Samuel Webb stone and a stone with 2 youngsters only made it 4 or 5 years old on the island back in the day. In this picture, the man in the center of the screen with the string in his hand is Mr. Randy Harvey. He's the descendant of the Revolutionary War veteran. And I'm working with my ground penetrating radar to survey looking for grave sites at this lumpy bumpy site in the woods. Here's a typical image of one of the lines of which I traversed with the radar, and the features that are pointed out with the red arrows, particularly the 3 in the middle, identify as burial sites. So it was quite exciting. And then we transcribed all the radar data into this plot where the red squares represent targets that would possibly.
Uh-oh, Bert's gone again. Here he's coming back.
I'm gone.
Hey, Bert.
Share screen. Yeah.
We see you again. There you go.
Yeah, I'm here. Okay. So anyways, a little hard to interpret, but this gives the level of detail of the data we collected on a 2-foot by 2-foot grid. Next project, the quest for the long-lost Long Cove floating bridge. Now, this is one that has been bothering me since I moved up here for 11 years ago. Here's a view from Route 15 looking down Long Cove. At low tide, in this image, there's from both shorelines, there's a little bit of like a sandbar, and I always thought it would look kind of peculiar. I thought there was something going on there. Talked to the people at the Historical Society. First of all, this is what a floating bridge looks like. This is not the
Uh-oh.
okay. Are we back?
You're back.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
I'm back. Okay, so this is an example of a floating bridge. As I said, the Deer Isle floating bridge was tidal. At low tide, it would rest on the mud, and at high tide, it would float, and people were able to cross. This is an image in Vermont, but gives you an idea. Research at the Historical Society, this is from their archives, gave me some clues. And then this map, which was drawn by Dr. Noyes in around 1915, shows the current Route 15, that's the arrow on the left, and once upon a time, the arrow on the right, roughly from Mariners Park, came across to some point on the south side of Long Cove. So I knew roughly the location of the floating bridge from this image. So next thing I did was I discovered this 1785 map, and in this display it's a little hard to see, but there's a thready pink line that runs from north to south across Deer Isle, and in the next view you'll see better. And then I compared that 1785 image with the 1881 image, and here's a close-up of the scene. You can see the kind of pink line is where in 1785 they claimed the bridge came across Long Cove. And if you look at the 1881 diagram, you'll see a dotted line road on the north side of Long Cove that just abruptly ends at the water line. And if you look further south across Long Cove, you see like a narrow double dashed line, which is physically, you're able to see that today. So what happened is somewhere between those two locations was the floating bridge of Deer Isle. And what I did next is I overlaid the 1785 map with the 1881 map, and again, hand-drawn map over a little bit more engineered map, but the relationship of the features lines up really. I mean, I'm happy with the coincidence. And here's a map of 1881 map, and I've highlighted where the approximate route is. Now, one of the things I wanted to do was find where the southern terminus of the bridge was, and in this image it's indicated by an asterisk and a stone wall feature as a solid line. So I went tramping through the woods, and I found those two features photographed here. In the upper right-hand image, you can actually, if you squint your eyes, if you're standing there, you can actually see sort of a ramp-like depression, an old dirt road that hasn't been used in 150 years, going down to the water's edge. And nearby in the woods, there's this moss-covered stone wall. In the image shown, the stone wall is running, say, vertically from front to back in the image. And that stone wall was a berm on one side of the old road at that point that went across. And this is a scene of approximately a Long Cove where the bridge was located. Moving on, the search for the long-lost Walker Pond Ice House. I don't know how many of you folks know that there was an ice house on Walker Pond around the turn of the century. 1899 to 1916, they harvested ice in the winter. They stored it in insulation, usually sawdust, in an ice house, and then by sailboat, sloop, they would transport that ice to places like Boston, and actually I've even heard down to Baltimore. these are photographs from the Sargentville Library and Historical Society of the old ice house. The photo in the upper left corner, you can see Walker Pond, you can see the structure, and then in the distance you can see Eggemoggin Reach. From the pond to Eggemoggin Reach, there was a conveyor belt, and you can see an idea of the conveyor belt in the lower left photograph. Well, a woman over at the Historical Society in Sargentville asked me if my old maps would show any information about where these structures were. Again, long lost features, last in business over 100 years ago. So went back to my my GIS and my old maps, and here you see an image of Google Earth. The top body of water is the southwestern corner of Walker Pond. The body of water at the bottom is of Eggemoggin Reach. This is the 1881 map of the exact same area, and there's no structures shown that would indicate the ice house. And of course that's right, because the ice house didn't develop there for another 18 or 20 years. So that's a good starting point. Then the next map is the 1904 map, and here I've circled in red features that were part of the ice house. The little tiny square-shaped features were structures, buildings that had to do with the ice house. The solid dashed line, I believe, is part of the conveyor system, and the pier is shown in the lower left section. The other linear line that goes from Walker Pond down to the Punch Bowl or Eggemoggin Reach, those are I guess municipal boundaries of some sort. They're not structural or cultural artifacts. So there's 1904. It shows up, and that's right in the heyday of the operation of this ice house. Now, once I learned how to do the LIDAR image, I generated this LIDAR image, and the two diagonal streaks that you see from near Walker Pond down towards Eggemoggin Reach have to
It's
if you're
okay.
having difficulty seeing those on the last chart, here's an annotated chart where I show you the features, the old piers, the conveyor tracks, and cellar hole or foundation structure from the ice house days. So using the old maps and using modern technology, able to find these cultural features. Where do I want to go from here? Well, find more unknown grave sites, honor the people who've passed, find historical sites, preserve historical artifacts, and just continue looking in the dirt. I mean, that's where the action is for me. And doing consulting work for military and civil organizations, continue doing that. I've done some interplanetary work with ground penetrating radar also, which is quite fascinating. Resources, this is what everybody wants to see. The free maps, some of the sources are the national maps, the US archives, the Library of Congress archives, and if you just Google terms like digital map collection or old maps, you can find things. Just beware that there are a lot of organizations selling old maps, historical old maps. You don't have to go there. There's just so much that's available online for free from different agencies, different university libraries. Just go and download. This GIS software I use, QGIS, is available at that website. Map Tiler is available at the shown website, and let's see, Google Earth. Most everybody has already gotten access. You just Google Earth, and you've got what you need there. Okay, here we go. Questions.
Thank you so much, Bert. That was fascinating. I really like
And
to
I'll put,
see the
oh, you're very welcome.
the style.
You'd like to see what? I missed that?
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's wonderful.
Well, so there you go. Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. There's my contact information. And if there's any questions, I'll entertain as many as long as you can, as long as there's questions.
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Bert. So now if Lander and I will kind of go through some questions if there were any, but if anybody wanted to raise their hand and ask Bert a question directly, either video or audio, now would be a fantastic time to do so. And
Jake,
Bert,
I have a quick question.
go for it.
And then I think we have a few participants with raised hands. So Bert, thank you. I really loved the progression of the maps and to see the style and detail change over time. And I was curious if you have any information or anything about mapping techniques potentially prior to 1776, and maybe how like native peoples in our area may have chosen to map this place.
I really don't. Again, that's sort of outside of my my area of interest or expertise. But the only thing I can say is the maps from 1776 were much more basic technology than much later. But I'm astounded with the accuracy, the spatial accuracy of the 1881 map. And you have to remember, these old maps back then especially were not created overnight. Mm-hmm. They must have taken 20 years of data compiled, and so they're a little sketchy. The old maps are a little sketchy in the sense that, well, when I checked that area back in 1762, there was nothing there. But by the time 1776 rolled around, somebody had a homestead there. So there's things that are missing because of the amount of time between when information was collected and the map was formulated. But it's just amazing the quality of the maps from 1881 and onward.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Before we have a bunch of questions coming in, so I'm super excited to get to everyone's questions. Just to add an additional perspective into this amazing pool of information that Bert has shared with us. At the Trust, we're excited about a new map that came out that shows, I can show you a little picture of it right here. I was able to pull it off my bookshelf, but it shows the cultural, it's from the Penobscot Nation Cultural and Historic Preservation Department, and it shows how the Penobscot Wabanaki people map these lands that we're on right now, and it's super fascinating and just a very different perspective. So I'll share it in the chat box if you want to look at it further. But
I definitely want to see that, Lander. That's a fascinating piece.
Awesome. I'll send it to you as well.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, Bert, you ready for some questions? I've got some good ones.
I'm strapped in. I'm holding on to the handles of my chair. Go ahead.
Okay. So we had, let's see. Lucy asked, what method is most effective for finding graves, GPR or LIDAR? Or maybe something else?
Well, I'll say LIDAR can give you some information if there's surface disturbances. You can see, I can't bring it up here, but I can see if it's a graveyard. I can see the in Flanders Field by the crosses row on row. I can see that kind of a structure. But here on the island, there are so many small family graveyards. The best thing is talk to somebody at the Historical Society, and if there's known or if there's believed graveyards, then doing a ground penetrating radar survey may show them. Yeah. No audio.
Oh, we can't hear you, Jake.
Sorry, we had a question from Karen asking if you found anything in the Mariners Park area.
Ah, I have found a wealth of items in the Mariners Park area within the last month or so. The Garden Society has graciously allowed me to do some metal detecting in the site, and everything I've found, I've turned over to the Garden Club. And the range of things that I've found, a lot of old spikes and nails from the cellar hole structure that the Garden Club is cleaning up. I've found ox shoes, which was a common mode of transportation, and I've found a little tiny fragment of brass, very fancy, that from what my research shows was a hasp on a prized book, like a Bible. In the old days, they'd have brass hinges and a little brass hasp to close the book. Found a little tiny fragment that is most likely that. And then the other item, depending upon how politically correct you want to call things, it's called a Jew's harp or a jaw harp, this little twangy musical instrument that jug bands and folks like that would play. And doing some research on that piece, that could go back as far as the mid to late 1700s. Looked up an archaeological website in Michigan, and they had identical ones that were of that period, the latter part of the 18th century. So all those items have been turned over to the Garden Club, and hopefully they will make a display and share that with everybody.
Thanks, Bert. I think Lander just shared a really good resource link at the bottom if anyone wants to check that out. And there, it looks like there's quite a bit of information. Lander, do we have anybody with raised hands?
We do. Karen and Ned Hill had their hand raised, so I will unmute them now.
Marvelous.
And I think they just have to unmute themselves.
I asked my question. Oops.
Oh, did you? Are you all set?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. Hi, Bert. How are you? I haven't seen you in ages.
Who's this?
Karen Hill.
Karen and Ned, Bert.
Oh, hi. Hello. Hope we'll get together at least at a safe distance sometime soon.
Yeah.
Karen, I'm
But
glad.
I'm good, thanks. My question was about Mariners Park.
Yeah, it's good to hear your voice, Karen. Lander, did you want to queue up another raised hand?
Let's see. I think that might be all the raised hands we have for a moment. If anyone else would like to put up their little blue virtual hand. Oh, we have another one. We have a Ken with a raised hand. I'm going to allow him to talk, and you can unmute yourself, Ken.
All right. Okay, am I on?
You are.
You're on.
Bert, you may know, but in the southeast corner of Walker Pond, there are 2 or 3 cribs which apparently supported the beginning of that conveyor belt.
Uh-huh. Now, see, I have not physically visited Walker Pond. The woman who, and I forget her name, forgive me, from the Historical Society up there said that it was private property and
Right.
she was unable to get access. So everything I did was, virtual from maps and LIDAR. And, study the LIDAR a little bit more. Maybe I can bring out some more of the features.
Yeah, they're very close to the surface.
Uh-huh.
Cool. Thank you, Ken.
Okay.
So if anyone else would like to raise their hand to ask Bert a question, you may. In the meantime, Jake, do we have any more questions in the chat box?
We sure do. Let's see. I'm just trying to be fair and go in order. Okay. So we had a question. Bert, do you use drone imagery in your work at all? Does that ever prove useful or necessary?
Drones. I have a drone, and I'm afraid to fly it because I don't want to ruin it. I don't want to crash. I find I get enough air imagery from Google Earth for what I'm doing, and I could fly the drone, but I think I get as much or as good information for my needs on Google Earth. Plus, the imagery I get on Google Earth is geo-referenced, so I don't have to kind of cut, paste, and fit. If I select a particular latitude and longitude on the map, it's on the money with the Google Earth, whereas I would have to do my own geo-referencing for whatever images that I acquire with the drone. If we were out in the desert or out in Iowa in the plains, I would say that a drone might be more useful. But here, I'm happy with Google Earth.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you for that, Bert.
It looks like we have another question from Robin. How does ethical metal detecting differ from metal detecting as usually practiced?
I'm not a treasure hunter. It's not being out there to all the treasure. I'm trying to find artifacts, photograph them, document them, and eventually turn them over to an organization who will curate them. The other things that fit into that realm are you fill your holes. The beer cans that you find and the pop tabs that you find, you take with you and dispose of properly. It's that kind of thing. It's mostly courtesy, and the other thing, as I said, these are artifacts that should be shared with everybody. They're little puzzle pieces, touchstones of our history, as opposed to, I got a sock drawer full of things I've found.
Thanks, Bert. The next inquiry is actually not an inquiry, but more of a compliment and a thanks to you from Jeremy. He says he's very interested in both mapping and history, and he's been fascinated in this presentation, and he can't wait to apply the resources provided by you.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.
And then Lander, thank you so much for providing that information, those links. And I'm actually really interested. That was a great question you asked at the beginning of this. So I'm really interested in looking into that myself. And then can we maybe provide those links in the follow-up email as well?
Yeah, I think I'll provide the links I shared in the chat box, as well as Bert, if you wanted to send me the links in your slideshow to some of your resources, I could send those out in the follow-up email as well so people could access them.
I'll make it happen. Sure.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you. It looks like we might be coming to the end of our time together. Do you see any more questions, Jake?
I don't. If Lander and I looked over your questions and you missed them, now would be a great time to just quickly resubmit them in the chat box. Or if you wanted to raise your hand, we do have just a few minutes left. So now would be the time. Thanks so much to the folks that have already raised their hands and participated that way. It always adds a different level of interest to the presentation. So other than that, I think we are good.
I think we are.
Okay.
We've got some thanks coming in. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you, Bert. Thanks for your work in Mariners Park. So I think we've all really enjoyed this time together this evening with you, Bert. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. And we will be putting out a recording of this webinar.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's good to. Oh God, I don't know that I want to watch that.
It's wonderful. Cool. Well, I think we'll wrap up.
I'm glad you enjoyed. I hope people. Well, I thank everybody, and I hope you don't look at your world the same way you did before. It's amazing to take a look at it through historic eyes.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Bert.
Have a good night, everyone.
You're welcome.
Thanks to our viewers.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.